If you would like to, if you'd be interested in joining the steering committee with Tracy Rosenberg of Media Alliance and KPFA, and I'm going to let each of the speakers give you a more detailed introduction of themselves. Of course, Kate Harrison is the wonderful council member for this district, the Downtown District 4, and George Lippman, long-term dedicated member of the Peace and Justice Commission and the Police Review Commission. So I will now turn it over to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to welcome everyone and thank BCA for putting on this forum. We're really happy to see people here. I know that you've seen a lot of mentions in the press and in newsletters, etc., about some of the work that's been going on police reform. We thought this is a good opportunity to give you a summary of what we've been up to and to hear from you. I want to say one of the things I found most disturbing in the discussion of police reform is that we haven't been hearing from the people that have been affected by the police. We have a lot of theoretical discussions about structures, about policy, etc. But what we're missing is a real life sense of what does it mean when someone makes a complaint against the police and goes to the PRC? What is their real experience? And I want to encourage people to talk about that tonight. If there are people here that have had that experience, one person at our last council meeting actually discussed her experience with that, and it was incredibly moving. I think the council members really heard that for the first time in a sense. So I'm hoping we can talk about this in a policy sense, but also talk about the real life impacts of the police, and also talk about what we can do as a community. Our agenda tonight is we have a number of topics we're going to be covering, as you'll see in the agenda. After the first four, which are, we're going to discuss use of force by the police, better reporting and analysis of racial and ethnic disparities in policing, enhancing oversight by the PRC and citizens of the police, and the proposed surveillance ordinance. After those four topics, we're going to take questions and comments on those four first, because there's a lot to cover here, and I don't want to shortchange those very important topics. To the extent we have time afterward, we're going to talk about the interactions with the federal government in programs that include the 1033 program, where we get military-grade equipment from the military. And we use interactions with federal and other police agencies, a bit about Urban Shield and NICRIC, a little bit about crowd control and the policies guiding the police in demonstrations, what went on this summer, and then a discussion with all of us about moving forward. What do we want to see happen next? So with that, that's essentially the agenda. We're going to take about 15 minutes in this first part, telling you what we've been working on and give you some preview of some of the upcoming issues. I'd like to hear your comments on these four topics, and then we'll move on to the rest of the agenda. Does it make sense?
Yep.
Any questions, thoughts? Okay. I want to say that the frame for me in looking at policing is to protect essential rights. We hear a lot about how the number one goal is to protect public safety. That is an incredibly important goal. But no less than that is protecting people's civil rights and civil liberties. And I get concerned when we talk about safety and not those other aspects. We need to look at protecting civil rights, protecting civil liberties, protecting people's privacy. We'll get into that in the surveillance ordinance, along with protecting public safety. It's not to forget public safety, but it is not our only goal. And the way that I look at this is through the lens of increased transparency in what the police are doing, increased citizen oversight through the PRC and through community organizing, and a real focus on de-escalation in the level of policing and what kinds of uses of force are used by our police department. Just briefly, I'm going to talk about these first two items and tell you what has occurred so far. We had a report, as you know, from UCLA that talked about disparities in policing. And it looked at the disparities in both use of force and stop data by ethnicity and race. And it asked this question, for example, in the stop data, do we have evidence that there's stops that are occurring of African Americans and Latinos and Asian Americans that are less justified by subsequent events? In other words, when someone is stopped, are they arrested? Are they cited? Or are they searched? Does anything happen other than the stop? Is there a follow-up activity? Are people stopped because there's a warrant outstanding, so there's a rationale that's already there, or are they stopped at the officer's discretion? And in the use of force, what are the disparities of use of force in between different communities? And also, how does that look over time? So in my view, a lot of this deals with transparency and data. What do we know about use of force right now? We know that use of force is more likely to occur with people that are Latinos and African Americans, and we know that we don't know how much use of force we have. The most important thing we know about use of force is that we don't know, because our police department has not traditionally used a reporting format that captures all uses of force. They only report force traditionally where there's been a complaint, an injury, or the use of a weapon. So other instances where perhaps somebody was in a fist fight with a suspect or an individual where there was any other kind of force had just not been reported. So we don't know what kind of force is going on. They haven't also traditionally categorized force. What Oakland and BART in San Francisco started doing is saying, what level of force was that? Was that a level 1, the least level of force, or was that a level 4? And the reason they do that is that, so over time, they can look at de-escalation. We can look at patterns and say, this year, most of the uses of force were much less drastic than the uses of force in prior years. We need that data. So we need to know about all uses of force, and we need to have them categorized in these levels. And we need that reported to us, to the public, to the Police Review Commission, and to the council. So our measure that passed last week, that's essentially what it did. And I think until we have that data, we know the truth about use of force somehow emotionally. We all have ideas about that, but we don't have really good data. So that's one of my first goals, is to make sure that data is there available for us. We're to get the first report on how the police department is approaching that problem in mid-December, and then in February we're supposed to get a report on how they set up all the data protocols and how they're going to tell us about this on a moving forward basis. A kind of similar issue is the issue about ethnic disparities in stops. And we see an enormous difference in the data, in the of stop data that don't result in further actions of African Americans and Latinos. It's strikingly different. It's not a small difference. And when we take out the stops that are based on warrants, in other words, the stops that are completely, I'm saying, non-discretionary, if you will, then we see an even bigger difference based on the ethnicity of the person stopped. So that sort of points to us to a problem. It doesn't point to a solution, and it doesn't really even point to an analysis of why this problem is occurring. I mean, we could say generally there's bias in the culture. Everyone is biased, and I would say that. We could say historical patterns, but we don't know where the locus of the problem is. We've never tried to study, are there certain parts of the city, are there certain squads, are there individual officers where this is happening more? So again, one of my goals is to make sure that we have for us the data that we need to understand this problem and a set of solutions. What would work to tackle this problem? I think in that way, I'm interested in looking at the police as being like any other civil employee. Any other employee of the city. Something goes awry, we try to figure out what's going on. Is this a training problem? Is this a problem of people that shouldn't have been hired in the first place? Is it a supervisory problem? Do we have problems with our procedures? None of that really happens with the police right now because there's kind of a fog over everything. There's sort of a, well, you know, we're all good people and we live in Berkeley and we're not really inherently racist, and so this can't be happening. I just think no matter how great your department is, you can make it better, and you should be looking at patterns and figuring out what is causing things and work towards solutions for those problems. I think part of this comes from our general idea that the police are somehow separate from the rest of government, that they're not part of us, that they operate in their own world. The council is responsible for setting policy for the police, just like it's responsible for setting policy for public works or the parks department or anything else. So I think that's been an interesting feature of this, is the sense of why are we in a sense, meddling in these areas. I don't think we're meddling. I think we're doing our job. We're trying to set policy in these areas. So that's, in terms of transparency, that's some of what we've been working on, is trying to just get the information together and to understand what's really, really going on. With that, I'm going to hand it over to George to talk a little bit more about citizen oversight and what's happening with increasing the authorities of the Police Review Commission.
Thanks, Kate. Now, if I go too long, just reel me in.
Okay. All right.
Just
Okay.
So, my name is George Lippman. I'm the current chair of the Police Review Commission in Berkeley, and recognize in White, the former chair of our commission, and a lot of stellar people in this audience who know as much as I do on the subject. The issue of transparency or oversight or accountability is one of the most challenging in dealing with policing. And the reason is you can pass a lot of great policies, and we've done that, but if they are not followed, there's sometimes very little that you can do. So I believe in policy, I believe in setting policy, otherwise you have nothing. If you have no laws, you have nothing to challenge behavior. But at the same time, we have to find ways to have police accountability. That's why 50 years ago, the Black Panther Party, exactly 50 years ago, called for community control of the police right next door in Oakland. And that concept spread immediately to Berkeley, where in 1973, the Berkeley City electorate created the Police Review Commission as a part of a response to that. And still we have no effective, at this moment, civilian control over the BPD. I'll give a couple examples. The first one is civilian oversight. It is a question for the community, particularly the African American community. People who come to us from the community say, you know, I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, this is the best department in the country. It's not happening for us here in South Berkeley or wherever African Americans live. And in fact, they report experiencing the police as a dangerous force in their midst to some extent. So I want to say that we are in the midst of writing in the commission a response to the racially disparate statistics that came out and to the anecdotal evidence that we hear from the Black community, which bears those statistics out. That will be discussed this coming Wednesday, next week, in the South Berkeley Senior Center, and maybe our final discussion of that, so everyone is welcome to take part in that discussion next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Secondly, the complaint process within the Police Review Commission, which is called the Board of Inquiry process, is, and I say this as the chair, I recognize it's a shambles. It is embarrassing to the commissioners, and it's humiliating and traumatizing in many cases to complainants, to the extent that attorneys will tell their clients, don't even go to the Police Review Commission. That's a bad state of affairs for something that was supposed to be an advance, the first Police Review Commission anywhere in the country. It would take me an hour to really describe all the failings of the BOI process, Board of Inquiry. The city manager, I'm not going to do that. The city manager has assumed the power to absolve officers from the complaint process. I'll just give a couple other examples. The complainant cannot even hear the testimony that the police officer's representative gives, and certainly cannot cross-examine the officer, but the officer can cross-examine the complainant. That's what I mean by traumatizing. We don't get the internal police files on the case, can't see them. The timeline is against us. We have only 120 days from the filing of the complaint to when discipline must be meted out by the department. Not when we hear the case, but steps far beyond that. That's not enough, and everyone at this point agrees it should be a year like everywhere else. The Police Association has effective veto power over our internal regulations of how we run the Board of Inquiry. The city manager has total veto power, and she'll negotiate it out without us present with the Police Officers Association. And we have a very high standard of proof, which is one of the city council is looking at now. This is like a really bad night.
It is a bad night, yeah.
So that's us. The city council has until this very day refused to step up and assert civilian leadership over the policing function, with a couple of rare positive exceptions. The leadership, the center-left leadership, and I'm not including Councilmember Harrison in it, talks a good game about empowering the Police Review Commission, extending its powers, creating a new and better commission, but at the same time has supported the city manager and the BPD's moves to disempower the Police Review Commission. It is a shell game that's going on at council. There's 3 examples. An urgency ordinance that was passed in order to give the city manager emergency power to make law that could put people in jail was passed without any consultation with the with the Police Review Commission. The pepper spray change, which undid the wonderful ordinance that people like Carol pushed through and other people 20 years ago, has been eviscerated without any consultation. And a ban on masks was passed by the city manager, which is an unconstitutional, entirely unconstitutional ban. You may or may not like masks, but this very law has been found to be unconstitutional in 1979. And our voice on this has been stifled and neglected. I just want to, I know I'm over time. The answer to all of this is to create a true police commission, like they have in San Francisco and like they just passed in Oakland in 2016, one that cannot be overridden by the city manager, that sets its own standard of proof, and can see the relevant information, internal department files on officer. It has to be, absolutely must be, a charter amendment. It cannot be an ordinance, because an ordinance can then be thrown out because it conflicts with the charter. And to do a charter amendment, you must go to the ballot. So and this is what council members Harrison and Worthington have proposed, and it's being shot down by the council majority. This has to be the top demand when we go and have that discussion again next Tuesday on the 14th. Or we will be nowhere. We will be back at the beginning. We'll be back in 1973, creating an ineffective commission that can do nothing and will take another 45 years to unwind and create something useful. And if you don't want that to happen, tell your members of the council, we need a charter amendment, bottom line. I'm not saying this will solve everything. Anything is just a law. Anything is a process that can be destroyed. But we cannot go anywhere without these changes. I think I better... So yeah, if a proposal comes from the council that excludes the charter amendment, I will strenuously oppose it. That would be worse than nothing. I better stop there.
I just want to say, even with the charter amendment, Oakland continues to struggle with these very issues about what they're required to meet and confer with the union about, what kinds of documents can be provided to their independent police review commission. So this is a long fight. Even if we were to successfully get a charter amendment, we have to recognize that there's a inherent bias against doing this in city government. And it's not just our government, it's all city governments operate in this fashion. So I'm completely in favor of what George is saying. I will say that I am putting forward some shorter-term PRC reforms in an attempt to at least draw out from other council members their willingness to support those. They may be things that we can do that don't need a charter amendment. They aren't the full answer, but they're at least an attempt to get the dialogue started. So you'll see on next Tuesday night 2 different measures. One is the short-term reforms, and the other is the longer charter amendment. So it's more of an attempt to sort of force people to talk about what are their issues with some of these issues that don't really require a charter amendment, but they continue to argue they do. So I think the better approach is a charter amendment, but we're trying to see how far we can get with the conversation next week. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tracy.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I think I'm listening. Okay, so I guess what I'm supposed to talk about is the surveillance and community safety ordinance. So let me tell you a little bit about sort of how that came to be and why it's coming to Berkeley. It developed out of a stop this fight. You guys know about stop this fights because there's one in Berkeley every single week. We have to stop this from happening, we have to stop that from happening. And around, well, I guess it came out in sort of 2012. 2012 to 2013. Okay. He was in longer than me, so he knows. Through a combination of, what's the word? Papers in the wastebasket that somebody found and perusals of what they call the consent calendar, which is sometimes where the city council puts things they don't want you to see. It turned out that there was going to be a citywide dragnet surveillance system in Oakland called the Domain Awareness Center, paid for by the Department of Homeland Security, that was just sort of going through the process without anybody really noticing, although there would have been cameras and microphones everywhere you went in the entire city of Oakland forever. So people organized and yelled and screamed, and after several years, stopped it. But on the other side of that, we sort of started to ask some questions like, we know this stuff is coming fast and heavy. It'll be back in some form, something else will come. There's a new gadget or innovation every 15 minutes. And how often are we going to be able to mobilize the whole city to stop this thing? You know, this is like a recipe for permanent exhaustion and craziness, and we're not going to win every time. So is there some kind of framework we could put into place that just sort of changes the dynamic here, that changes the frame? Like maybe they have to ask us first before they do these things? And so basically what this ordinance that we wrote, and it was kind of written by grassroots folks, and then they were like, we don't have any money, so they went to ACLU and said, ACLU, can you give us some money to print out 50,000 copies of this thing? And so that's essentially what happened. And the ACLU booklet that came out at that time is called Smart About Surveillance, and you can grab it on Google or someplace like that. But basically, the drift was, you can't put every single policy decision in a city to a vote of the people. You wish you could. Direct democracy would work better, but what we have is representative democracy. But you have these folks, you elect them, they can weigh in. And what it comes down to is, you know, I can see a world with no surveillance equipment and a world without police. Most public officials can't. That's the reality. And I've talked to them often enough to kind of know that. But if they have to approve things, if there's a parameter for how something can be used and how it can not be used, if they have to report back on how they used it, what they did with it, if there's penalties for when you do something that's not can be used policy, that you're not allowed to do, then you have a situation where essentially you're slowing things down. You have a situation where essentially you've got more control over it than you used to have. This sort of breakneck pell-mell speed that we've been seeing, where it's one thing after another, becomes more gradual. And in my own experience, when you talk about transparency, what you really mean is you figure out when they're lying to you, which is pretty much all the time. But the process of sort of forcing this stuff out into the open is the part where you, the public, can say, well, what it says on this piece of paper doesn't match that piece of paper, which is almost always true. And that's how we bring the stuff up out of the shadows. And the truth is you can't fight something that you can't see. And there are some pretty good examples of that, like the stingrays that existed for 15 years before anybody knew they were there.
What's a stingray?
Is there anyone who in this room who doesn't know what a stingray is? Okay, there are. Okay, you're right, Kate. Okay, so a stingray is a cell phone interception device. It is basically a little box that impersonates a cell phone tower, and the police use it to target a subject, and when they set it up, it basically will swoop all of the cell phone data from the target phone and any other phones in the vicinity. It tricks the phone into hooking up to the fake interceptor rather than the actual cell phone. Okay, so this this ordinance was put forward in the city of Oakland. It's about to pass there. Berkeley being so close, Councilmember Worthington came to us and said, maybe we should try something like that here. So we tried it back in 2016. Some of you will remember the council was a little different in 2016. So we got a referral to both the PRC and the Peace and Justice Commission, and for the past year and a half, it's been going around through the process. It took a while, but we got a new lease on life after the election, and it has finally surmounted all committees, including the Police Review Commission, which was not looking so good for a while. And it will be in front of the council, I believe it will be December 5. And what this basically does is it gives us a framework. So A, if we can organize sufficiently and pressure the city council enough, we can say no. And if we have to say yes, we can say yes on our own terms. How can it be? How can it not be? Tell us what you actually did. Screw up and there are penalties. And that is so far ahead of where we have been on most surveillance conversations that it's going to make a huge difference. So I hope you guys will support it in December.
I want to add one other piece before we take questions on these first sections. Also on next Tuesday is a requirement the council approve the acceptance of any military equipment under what's known as the 1033 program. Under Obama, it was required that local jurisdictions vote to accept the equipment. Of course, President Trump has eliminated that requirement. We are looking to set a local policy that we will only accept equipment that the council's agreed to accept. The reason we are not banning it outright, A, is I don't think that I could get that passed. And B, because there's some equipment, they have things like refrigerators and, typewriter, well, PCs and things like that. So we basically, they might have typewriters also. So there may be things that we want, but this is in the vein of what Tracy was saying. We want the control to be back and the pressure to be back on the council to say, yes, we're going to accept that piece of equipment. This also gets into the armored van, which I'm not going to discuss at length right now, except we are under an obligation to come back with a policy for the armored van, and that has not yet occurred. So we will not be utilizing the armored van until that policy is underway, and I'm hoping by that time we'll be out of urban shield, and that will change the picture somewhat significantly. So with that, I thought we'd take a few minutes to take comments from people and questions and thoughts. We don't want to talk at you for an hour and a half. If you want to come up and use the mic, or from where you're sitting is fine. So. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys all so much for your work on this and you guys for coming. How would you characterize the resistance currently on the city council for the information piece about stops and use of force? So that we can frame our own arguments better.
Okay. I would say that there's a lot of, that was a draft report from UCLA, and that report isn't finished. Let me just give you a little background. It started with an idea that we were going to look at 2015 stop data. It took so long to get the report that then the police department started saying, well, shouldn't we get the 2016 data, which would just create more delay. And the reason I'm really not in favor of waiting is because there have been other studies. There was a study in 2015 by the NAACP. There have been repeated studies by the PRC evaluating the data in the police department's own data system that show disparities. So I feel like the resistance has so far been based on this let's wait for the final report, which I don't personally think is necessary. I don't actually know what is going to happen on this item. I can tell you when we put it forth at the last meeting, there was an attempt to take out the word racial before disparities, which just incensed me completely, and really sort of tried to gut the item. So we have put that back in. We're hoping we're going to get more support this time, and that's about what I can tell you about the resistance to it so far. Part of what happened, just briefly, is over the summer when there were events, political events here, they were used as a shield for not making any progress on any of these items. And that's my biggest concern. Something happens and we say, well, we can't work on that because the police are really busy right now. Or, oh, we can't work on that because they have been so attacked by people. And I'm concerned about that. I don't think we would say that about any other part of government. And I want to recognize Commissioner Pritchard, who's here from the PRC. One of her thoughts is that we create a data analyst for the police department, which is something I'm requesting in the budget. Because another piece of this is we don't have the people to do the work. And actually, it's really true in the city of Berkeley. We have a very thin analytical layer. We have department heads and we have really good staff at an operational level. We don't have a lot of analytical people. So that may be true. I'm trying to undercut that argument by saying, fine, let's give you a data analyst. Isn't that great? So that's how I see the resistance right now. I think the events of the summer were used as a shield to not make progress in this area.
Did you have anything to add, George?
Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to just assume you're loud, Jack, so go for it.
Yeah. So I'd like to go back to the charter amendment thing. So what I heard you describing was a very difficult situation in trying to get a charter amendment put on the ballot by the city council. What's the status of exploring getting it onto the ballot through signatures?
That's a very good question. There are two ways to do this for people's information. Going through the city council and getting signatures. We calculated it's about 12,000 signatures. And we have, I think you get like 30 to 60 days to do that. I'm open-minded about which way we should go. It has to be a charter amendment and it has to be one of those two ways. So this is an open conversation about this. The upside of doing the signature gathering, which has been done in the past, and it can be done, is that you control exactly what goes in it. If you go to the council, they will put what they want to in it, and you have basically only political input into that. On the other hand, it would be a plus to have the Police Review Commission, and especially the City Council, deciding. I think we're going to figure that out over the next couple of months. When we go into the last section, we talk about how to move forward. I'm going to try to recruit everybody to that campaign, and I'll tell you exactly, from my perspective, what it's going to take.
Follow-up question, brief.
Yeah.
What's the timeline on that? That is, what's the final date by which signatures would have to be gathered in order for such a charter amendment to be put on the November 2018 ballot?
Do you know better?
I think it would be mid to late May.
120 days, isn't it, between?
120 days, said Sharon?
Yeah.
Well,
Before the election?
No, between the time when you turn them in and the election.
there's two different things we're talking about. There's the amount of time you have to gather signatures, which is maybe 120 days, but then there's the last date by which you can submit the signatures to get them approved. And that was what I was saying, mid-May to late May.
Sounds about right.
Yes, Steve. Yeah, I'm going to hand you the mic. Do you have a question? Yes, please do.
The fact is that the city of Berkeley has passed an ordinance agreeing to make reports to United Nations Human Rights Committees. There are 3 committees that deal with police problems. There are 3 treaties the United States has ratified that deal with police problems. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, and the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. The United States has ratified all 3. Each treaty requires the United States government to make periodic reports to the United Nations Committee that deals with that issue, and those reports are required to include information at the state and local levels. Needless to say, the United States does not make the reports on time, sometimes it doesn't make them at all, and it never asks for information at the local level. And for that reason, I proposed some years ago that the city council adopt an ordinance permitting and requiring the city of Berkeley to make reports, and that ordinance was adopted. So the reality is that this is the year when the United States is required to make a report to the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And that report must include information about violations by the police. And so I think this body tonight should decide to ask the City Council to carry out its duties under this treaty, the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and under the ordinance that was adopted to say that the city should make reports. In addition, any non-governmental organization can make a report to a UN committee. So if any of you are members of any organization that could write a report about violations by the police, and it would have to include, in this case, racial discrimination, which happens all the time, it would be very useful. And if you want more information, my name is annfginger@gmail.com.
Thank you so much. We're going to do that in our next newsletter so that people will have that. Linda, I'm going to let Linda deal with which newsletter? Our district has a newsletter. If you sign up, we'll be sending out periodic announcements. Want me to just pick? Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't know if this will reach.
I think you all have to get in line.
Yeah.
You have to stand up.
You want me to stand up?
Yeah.
I might fall over. Hold it close to your mouth. I'm a spokesperson on police militarization and surveillance for the Veterans for Peace, and we had handed out a flyer earlier. And we deliberately didn't use the word reform. We feel that's not strong enough. And we feel that there can't be real change in our police department as long as there is the federal influence from the programs which the City Council has been year after year renewing. And that is the Urban Area Security Initiative. They apply for military equipment through that program. And also it funds Urban Shield. But I understand Berkeley doesn't get any money for Urban Shield, that all goes to our Sheriff Ahern. So with respect to Urban Shield, what the City Council needs to do is just say, we're not going to send our police out anymore, but they still need to take action to stop their tie with the Urban Area Security Initiative because they can get military equipment through them. That's the Department of Homeland Security, as well as through the Department of Defense's 1033 program. So we have two sources of military equipment, and we think the council should just break ties with those, not be deciding whether the police department can get some or other military equipment. We don't want any military equipment with our local police departments. Also, how can you have any transparency with regard to what the police department is doing when the apparatus for the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center, the NICRIC intelligence program, includes what's called the Joint Terrorism Task Force. The Joint Terrorism Task Force consists of terrorism liaison officers sitting in our police departments. They are policemen who have been deputized by the FBI, and they are sworn to secrecy. They cannot tell their local supervisors what they are doing unless their FBI supervisor has told them that it's okay. So how can you have transparency about what's going on? How can we expect to reform our police as long as we have I call it the fascist Trump administration in control of these programs that have infiltrated our police departments? And let's not forget that our Attorney General is Jeff Sessions. He's a known racist. The FBI is under the Department of Justice, which he's over. Thank you.
Yeah. I wanted to, let me just speak about that for a minute. I think there is this inherent connection between the way policing works locally and these national programs. And I am really concerned about us remaining in Urban Shield. As you know, I voted against us remaining in Urban Shield. What we're trying to do, which is probably frustrating to many of you, is parse out each of these issues in turn and work on them each in turn. So we have a lot of like local policing issues we're trying to fix in the immediate term. We have our long-term fix of making the PRC stronger, medium-term fix, and we have this overarching piece about withdrawing from these agreements with the federal government. So I think they all go together, and I really appreciate you bringing that up. We're going to talk more about that in the second part of the program. Do people have any more comments, questions about the first 4 topics? Yeah, Winston.
Yeah, so I think you can hear me. I wanted to know who on the city council wanted to take out the term racial disparities. I wanted to know who they are, and should we contact them between now and whenever they meet to let them know how we feel about that.
It was a proposal from Councilmember Hahn.
Excuse me?
It was a proposal from Councilmember Hahn.
From Hahn was one of that voted for it and
Never got
not against it. It was just Hahn by herself?
And the mayor had co-joined on her measure.
Excuse me.
The mic is a problem. Yeah. I'm
So
gonna
was Hahn, who else? I want the names.
Yeah, what occurred is we had 3 people on our item, which were council members Worthington, Bartlett, and myself. And the alternative item came forward from the mayor and Councilmember Hahn. I feel that their main purpose was to take out some of these PRC reforms, but at the same time, there was language in there that said things like disparities, if any. They took out the word racial, etc. So I was very concerned about the change in tone because I think it speaks volumes. That's what we're facing on Tuesday night, is a discussion about this. So, but I think you'll see a change in votes.
So would it be helpful for us to contact?
Yes, absolutely. It would be very helpful. Yeah, it would be very helpful. Thank you.
Well, could you clarify what the wording, what would be helpful if we, what specific wording should we use?
If you go to the, I know this is sort of a pain in the neck, but if you go to the website of the city council and look at the alternative measures that were put up, you will see the changes. Most of the changes had to do with taking out our short-term reform of the PRC that would allow them to have more power in the short term. Those were stricken. The items that were changed in the text dealt with this language and also added some language about really saying, well, we're not really sure there's a problem, basically, which what I'm really concerned about. So we can get you copies of what the original looked like and what the alternative looked like.
Kate, is item 24, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's now item 24. Last week was 26. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Krantz, and I am here because I work in Berkeley, and I'm pretty concerned about the bold-faced lying that police can do in Berkeley City Council meetings, for example, about their use of pepper spray. At a Berkeley City Council meeting that I went to recently, police had brought in basically spoils of war. What they think of as like threatening posters and signs and things like this, placed it on the floor between their own special table and the Berkeley City Council, and put giant cans of pepper spray on their table. And they sat there and answered questions from the council about the proposed deregulation of the use of pepper spray on crowds in Berkeley. And one of the things, when pressed, that one of the police officers did mention was that they're planning on using it on crowds, which is specifically not supposed to be done. So looking forward to some follow-up on that. And I'm also, I'm just really concerned about the use of force on the homeless population of Berkeley, particularly with the ongoing litigation regarding that. So.
I am also extremely, let me respond to a couple of things you said. I'm also extremely concerned about the use of force on homeless people. And basically, it's a situation of who cares? They're homeless people, they're out of sight, they have no political power, and we're gonna do what we need to. That is the underlying, I think, feeling. And it's unacceptable. And we have an effort within the Police Review Commission to really highlight, daylight, and that's not just use of force, but it's the theft of their belongings, and just the entire unaccountability of it, and the attitude about it. So we have a subcommittee within the PRC that is examining this, and I think that's very important for people to be feeding information to. Let me respond to the issue about pepper spray. The PRC in the last month has written a letter of demand to the council to turn back the policy and to, in fact, strengthen the original policy. Because the policy is being, what the police are saying is, look, we can use this on crowds anyway under the policy. We just wanted that nailed down in the law and codified. So if in case there's any misunderstanding, we want to clarify that shooting pepper spray into a crowd and saying, but it's not for crowd control, we're going after an individual. That's BS. And we have to call that out, and we have to insert something new in there to say, and just because, and you can't use it at all on the crowd. And the reason is, this is, I guess we'll get into this later, but I want to say, sending pepper spray into a crowd, shooting into a crowd with less, so-called less lethal, or wading into a crowd and hitting a bunch of people because they get too close to you. That's not going after an individual, even though you say I'm targeting an individual. It's impossible because of many factors, including the winds change, people move around in a crowd, and frankly, and I've had police say this to me, our aim is not that good. We shoot into a crowd and we're going to hit the wrong person.
That's literally the nature of the weapon. It's literally meant to be an indiscriminate weapon. Berkeley City Police, they're literally coming forward saying, Berkeley PD shall attempt to precisely spray into crowds. It's unacceptable.
That's no good. Okay.
That was the original language that was changed on the day of the meeting.
Well, and also I just want to say part of the issue here was the size of the canister. So I think the subtlety in here was not just the change in policy, but they wanted bigger amounts, which also gives me a lot of pause. Yeah, I saw Sharon's hand, and then Andrea, and then Russell. We'll come back to you.
Yeah, my question comes from folks raising the issue of the homeless, and I guess my question is, what right do we have as residents to intercede in situations between the police and the homeless? I'll describe a situation I was in. People from the Downtown Berkeley Association that wear the vests, you know, they were waking up a guy very rudely and trying to get him to move from a doorway. So I was explaining to them, you know how it is when most of us wake up, where we don't just jump up and, you know, we're like tired, and this guy was groggy, and he didn't want to be, you know, just so rudely woken up and told that he had to get on his way. So we kind of went back and forth on that. Apparently they called a police officer because he arrived, and he started talking to the guy in a really rough way. And so I said, "You're not planning to arrest him, are you?" And the policeman turned to me, and I don't remember his exact words, but it was sort of like, "You better get out of the way because I'm in charge here, and you're not allowed to do this." And so I'm wondering, do we not have a right to interact? Do we not have a right to make a judgment? And that kind of, I mean, I wasn't pushing anybody. I wasn't being rude. I was simply trying to make some points.
I'm going to take Andrew's question and Russell, and then we're going to move on to the rest of this discussion.
Well, I guess my comment / question has to do with enhancing oversight by citizens. But I guess the oversight that I'm interested in is that I don't believe that we can control the police at this point. But I do think the one lever that we do have is the budget. And what is kind of astonishing to me is the number of times that the chief has come to our meeting, to the Police Review Commission meetings, and said, we have no annual goals. We don't plan our training program for the department year to year. We don't do a year-long plan. Sort of catch as catch can. You know, there's a catalog of trainings. They'll take this one or take that one. But the trainings are not correlated or corresponded to a plan for what we want the police department to do. Neither is the budget. When we asked the chief, well, how do you plan the budget? He says, well, you know, it's sort of based on last year and a little more. You know, that's kind of the idea. But in a well-run organization, you have goals. You try to get the staffing and the training and the resources that you need to achieve the goals, and you have a process for evaluating, did you achieve those goals? As far as I can tell, none of those things exist within the Berkeley Police Department. So while we tinker with policy and we're unable to hold officers individually accountable, we do have this question of management and holding management accountable for outcomes and articulating the outcomes that we would like to see year to year. And so, for example, I don't know, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but my bike has gotten stolen, you know, probably 3-4 times in the last year. And nobody gives a whoop over at BPD because they're rappelling off, or here, you know, they're kind of a substitute army or whatever they're trying to do. Whatever happened to investigations of crime? Are they trying to solve crime? Like, what are they doing with crime? Like, that seems like not so on the back burner. Is that even an issue for them anymore? So I guess I would ask that, as you consider, on the Police Review Commission, we said, well, can we look at your budget? And can we look at your rationale for the numbers that you've produced in your budget? We asked that question in February of 2017. Our questions were not answered until June, which was well past, the council had already put the budget to bed. So it was a moot point. So we were delayed for months. But I guess what I'm asking Councilmember Harrison, can we have an open discussion about the metrics that are going to be used to evaluate the performance of the police department? Let's not have this be a sacred cow.
Yeah.
Let's really have some practical management conversations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Russell, and then Wilson Winston, and then we're going to move on, and we'll come back though. There's another chance.
Hi folks, my name is Russell Bates. I've lived in Berkeley about 44 years now. A problem we have, the police, if you look back in history, started off as slave catchers. Today they're more weaponized bureaucrats, armed bureaucrats who go out and give people tickets and everything that increase the fines, that result in fines, which increases the revenue coming into the cities because everybody is hurting in the city government. There are quite a few myths in Berkeley, one of which is the Berkeley police are the best police department in the history of the known world or galaxy or universe. They're not. We all know that. Anybody who's been involved in on a personal level, being hit by their clubs or close contact level, knows that that's not true. Anybody who has persons of color friends who have heard their stories know that's not true. There's a lot of experienced people who know that's not true. And as far as the progressive city council, I think that's part of the Berkeley myth too. There's a couple members of the council. Councilmember Harrison is one, Cheryl DeVilla is another, who are possibly very progressive people. The others, it's more of a myth. They'll do what whichever way the wind is blowing, they put their finger up and then do something else with it. I don't know. But the pepper spray containers, it's outrageous. You know, the bigger the pepper spray container, the smaller the, you know, you can make an analogy out of that too. But the point is that these police in Berkeley, they're totally out of control. They're totally doing essentially what they want to. They all have college education, which is a big plus, people say, but it makes them a lot smarter. It makes them a little bit more underhanded. They can devise ways to do things that not necessarily seen by everybody or understood by everybody. So just take whatever the police say with a grain of salt and don't believe them to begin with. If their actions follow their words, fine, but that's seldom the case. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mansour.
Yes, thank you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mansour Dean. I'm the president of Berkeley and ACB. I recently attended a PRC subcommittee meeting with a young man, African-American young man that's a teacher. He teaches within the Berkeley Unified School District. He had filed a complaint against an officer for discrimination, illegal search, and one other issue. When he presented his case, which he did an excellent job, the police officer and his representatives were present to hear what he had to say and communicate with him regarding that. When the police officer spoke, he and I both had to leave the room. So we have no idea what they said. There was no way for him to respond to the statement made by the police officer, however they were able to respond to his statements. It's a very biased system, and there's no way people will not come to the PRC to file a complaint when they know that they don't have a chance to win. So I think that's something the PRC really need to be strengthened, and perhaps we should certainly take a look at Oakland and San Francisco policies and see if we can bring them to Berkeley. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll just go ahead. I think we'll go ahead and just let people keep asking questions, and then we'll have some follow-up comments.
Steve, you want the mic or the spot?
Yeah, following up on that, if we want to make the PRC give it the power to get inside the police department and take a look at records, data, and things like that. One of my questions would be, how are we going to get past the Patrolman's Bill of Rights, which is at the state level? And you can pass a charter amendment for the city, but it doesn't have the weight of state law. If state law says that the police departments don't have to reveal personnel records and personal data, or, as Brother Edina's said, don't have to have the complainant there when the cop gives his response, how are you going to get transparency? I have two other questions. On the question of racial profiling, we've been dealing with this for 4 or 5 years. There have been demands for data for 4 or 5 years. There have been, like attempts to get something through city council for 4 or 5 years. And little dribs and drabs, like here and there. But we even had a problem getting a report on racial profiling in this police department from an independent source. They gave it to the police department, meaning it was no longer independent. Well, we finally got our hands on it. And yet we accepted it because we had ordered through our city council an independent report on police racial profiling, and it turns out it's not independent because it goes to the police department first, and we accept this. Well, the problem lingers on, and I would have a third question. How come there are no people of color on this panel?
I'm going to answer question 3 first. We did invite a couple of people who were unable to attend. And I am saddened by that. I want to say about Copley, which is the case that interprets the Police Bill of Rights and the Police Bill of Rights, there are stronger labor protections for police officers than other government employees. That's true. However, It is our firm belief, and attorneys in Oakland have expressed this belief before the charter amendment, and they continue to express this belief today, that some of the things that have been discussed as prevented by the Police Officers Bill of Rights are actually not prevented. For example, sharing of records with police review commissions. To the extent the law says that those records cannot be shared generally, it explicitly says they can be shared with police review commissions. There's a whole section, and I'm going to have George talk about that more. We have an analysis from Dan Siegel in Oakland about this issue about the preponderance of evidence standard that's used. We are using a higher standard of clear and convincing proof, which is a nearly impossible standard to meet. Most other jurisdictions are using preponderance of evidence. We could do that now without a charter amendment if the city manager were willing to negotiate with the police department. When we say that, what she says is, I have to meet and confer with the police union to do that, and I did start those discussions, and they are not willing to budge on that. I have a big background in labor negotiations, and labor negotiations do not require that you reach agreement in the end. They require that you have significant, substantive, and I would say respectful conversation with people over a period of time. She had a couple of meetings and then sort of said, well, they're not interested. That's not substantial meet and confer. And at the end of that substantial meet and confer, she could impose a requirement that we use a preponderance of evidence. Her analysis, we have a letter from her that says the amount of time and effort that would have to go into the substantial meet and confer is not something that I want to invest in because I don't think it'll be successful. And I think what I'm looking for right now is more legal analysis to help me with that, because I think there's a lot of, as I said before, a bit of fog around this Police Officer Bill of Rights and exactly what it does and does not require when it comes to PRCs. That's different than sharing everything with the general public. I want to say one thing that BART did, which I thought was really intelligent and could be effective for us. They set up a police auditor's office, which is independent of the police department. That office reports directly to the BART board. And in their case, they have the authority to review all records, and they use a preponderance of evidence standard, etc. And then to, like a prosecutor, make a case to the Police Review Commission. So what I've come to learn is that the fear of police is that they are concerned that unreasonable accusations will be levied and these records will all be opened. To that I say, I trust our PRC, and I would even more trust an independent auditor that could provide some of that review role. I'm looking for structural solutions to this problem. We need a charter amendment, but we should also be not accepting this blank answer that just says, none of this is allowed because of the Police Officer Bill of Rights. I personally do not accept that and believe that. No, the Board of Inquiries is not.
Commissions are open to the general.
Not the Board of Inquiry.
Let me explain, because I've studied this for many years. We are constrained by a number of issues. Some of them are state law. That's correct. There's some things that I'll get to in a second. There's some things that we cannot affect without changing state law. And that primarily is the ability of the public to see inside the police department and understand what's going on. Some of our problems are on the city level, with the city manager, the city council, and the police union. And some of them are of our own making, the weakness in the past of the Police Review Commission. But this thing is a misunderstanding. It's what the provisions that keep us from being able to share our confidential data with the public consider us an arm of the disciplinary process. You're either one or you're the other. We're not the public. The PRC is not the public. That's how we're able to get any confidential information at all. And we sign a non-disclosure agreement, a confidential agreement, and then it is the right of the city manager under those laws to give us any information the city manager deems fit. And if you go back and look before 10, 15 years ago, the city manager did not only give information, but allow the PRC to come and sit in on an IA meeting, internal affairs. to send somebody from the police department, from the IA department to come in and give us information. Nothing has changed there. So let's not be confused about the powers that we currently have. The problem there is the city manager, not the state law. You know, put it where it is. Now, what we don't have is the right to demand that information. We can only the city manager has the right to give it to us. The way around that is a charter, because then we will be like in San Francisco over the police department and having the power to affect the discipline and set policy and procedure and all of it. That's the idea. But we do have, the city manager does have the right to share that with us. And then the second question I just wanted to mention, it was about, the data. This is also a misunderstanding. The whole thing with the Center for Policing Equity report, to me, was always a sideshow. Yes, we had to demand the release of that information, but we already knew what was going on. And I don't mean in some general sense, oh, well, we know the police are, but no, we knew because we forced the police department, and we cooperated with them to publicize the thousands of rows online of every police stop. You know, imperfect information, but it's there and it's enough to go in. If you have a minimal understanding of like databases, you can go in and parse it out and figure out exactly what the disparities are. So we got that beginning in 2015. ACLU, the NAACP, Copwatch, National Lawyers Guild. We figured it out in 1 week. Still to this day, the department has never copped to it, so to speak, and admitted that they have an issue with racial disparities. But we know, and we in the PRC are going forward with our analysis, our response to the CPE, the good and the bad in the PRC, in the CPE report, and our recommendations, which I hope people will read and try to get enacted by the council.
Thank you, George.
Thanks for having this forum, and I hope you look for multiple paths forward to try to get. And it seems to me that one thing you're missing is leverage over the city manager and over where we go from here, and especially in police and in the Police Officers Association. So one way you can get leverage is the power of the purse. And one way you can get power of the purse is to start defunding the police and moving tasks out. Now, this is something you're considering for the Wells Fargo. In Wells Fargo, you know, we can say, well, we only have this one thing that can do it all, so we gotta go with them. And so you're gonna start breaking out pieces of the Wells Fargo and giving it to this little bank and this little bank. And you can do that with the police. You can start pulling out pieces of their budget and say, we're gonna create a separate thing that's not police, that are gonna deal with mental illness, for one. And these are the people that are going to deal with, and they're not going to be police, they're not going to be part of the Police Officers Association. And you can do that with multiple pieces of that department, and you can just start the dismantling process. Now, they may react to that and say, whoa, we're going to, we don't want to be dismantled, we don't want to lose our budget. Maybe we're going to give a little bit, and maybe you'll actually get some response on their part. But if they don't, you go forward with a slow dismantling and pulling out pieces until the police department is some small unit that handles crime and does the stuff that we heard earlier by Pritchett talking about, that's much, much narrower focused, and you have other departments that are not police to handle other things.
Thank you, James. I want to say about that, I don't know the right answer. I don't know, I haven't seen the data on how many police officers we need for their key function of fighting crime. So I'm not willing to say at this moment they need fewer people, but they need targeted people, and we need to do what James is talking about, which is some of these other activities need to be carried out elsewhere. I'm just not going to say I'm dismantling their budget and taking out any percent or anything like that. I think we want to think about it functionally. What is it that they should be doing functionally? What is it that would be done better elsewhere? And then work from there on that core function of crime fighting. How many people do they need? I don't know the answer to that. I've never seen the data, so I'm not willing to commit to that. I think there was a hand.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hi, Michael Deal. I am homeless. I do not trust the police. I see people on the streets call, because there is violence on the street. But I could advise people don't, because like you're going to get more violence from the police, and you won't be protected by the police. That's what we see. Our calls are never responded to. There's plenty of surveillance cameras already in Berkeley, unlike Oakland, where we marched and stopped it. So I don't know. You should look around and point them out to you. Us people on the streets are very aware of that we're being watched continually. Now, they passed this resolution about, mass, basically the right to declare martial law if this right-wing people come. Now, I know the right-wing are planning to come to People's Park on Veterans Day. I don't particularly feel like having the police there is any better because I've dealt with them directly. Because I feel like when they come with pepper spray and the massive, I feel like we're playing in the hands of what the right wing wants, which is the military police state, by the things that we're doing. So I'm really much more concerned about that than some of the right wing people that I've personally talked to that come to the park that I expect I'll see on. And I'm more like putting that out to you people, because the people are what would protect us. And I don't want the police particularly there, because as I dealt with right-wing skinheads back when I was in a punk rock club, we dealt with it fine by ourselves.
Thank you. I'd like to, Hallie, would you mind if we just say a couple things about Urban Shield and Nick Rick, and then some questions? Because I think it's another issue we haven't really
This one?
Yeah. I just want to make sure everybody's aware that there is a subcommittee of the council, and Councilmember Davila, who's on the subcommittee, just came in. Thank you, Cheryl, for joining us. And it's composed of Councilmembers Davila, Wengraff, myself, and the mayor. We're examining the participation in Urban Shield, and moreover, in a subject that we keep losing track of, which is NICRIC, the national, and I'm going to have Tracy talk a bit more about this. This fits in with the national sort of data collection done by the federal government. I'm very concerned about this issue. I don't think that our department is willy-nilly sending a lot of data to the feds, but I do believe that they receive alerts from the feds, that those alerts come from police departments and have very poor standards. There was examples of reports that our police officers were receiving about people that were anti-death penalty advocates in southern states, etc. And this just feeds into people's mindset about whether someone is dangerous or not. It goes to the point that you just made. I'm sorry, where did he go? The person just spoke. The point that he just made about this sort of demonization of people, this idea about the dangerous people. And I'm very worried about our participation in Urban Shield, but moreover in NICRIC. And I want to let Tracy say a few words about that.
Okay. So I guess I should talk mostly about NICRIC is what it sounds like. So I'll do that. And on Urban Shield, I think everybody here in Berkeley knows all about Urban Shield by now, because we had that big confrontation in June. NICRIC is the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center. It's one of several intelligence centers set up after 9/11 in a national network. The purpose of fusion centers is to bring in data from a huge variety of sources, mix it up, curate it, and essentially provide a more integrated data picture. Berkeley interacts with the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center in 3 specific ways. And there are other cities that have far more complex and significant relationships than Berkeley, but we're here. And those 3 ways are: Berkeley submits suspicious activity reports. The PRC, as George can tell you, did a lot of work on suspicious activity reports. And the number has gone down from several dozen to, I believe in 2016, it was 1. Is that correct? And I think it was about some people yelling at each other on the sidewalk, more or less.
No, it was a domestic violence incident, but that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, it was not the most convincing case of incipient terrorism that anyone had ever seen. Submitting any kind of suspicious activity report is essentially sticking someone into a terrorism database. It's not great, but the number has gone down substantively. Second thing that happens, license plate. readers. Now, you guys have license plate readers in the city, but you're not sending that data to NICR yet. What you are doing is your police department is running searches on license plates, including partial license plates for investigative reasons. And when they do that, they fill out a little piece of paper with their case number and the details about that case, and they send it to NICR saying, this is happening, we're investigating this, do you have this license plate number? And those records stay at the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center indefinitely. Who can access it? All of the NICRIC partners. That includes FBI, Joint Terrorism Task Force, IRS, U.S. Marshals, ICE. So if you are a person of suspicion in a case, or if you happen to have the same, 4 of the same license plate numbers as someone who is a person of suspicion in a case in Berkeley, that information, it's gone to NICRIC. So this process of digging up license plates from NICRIC instead of from the DMV really changes the consequences of doing that. The DMV doesn't have any information but your darn driver's license info. At NICRIC, you bring in 17 federal agencies. And the third thing that happens is, George, is the right number 3 or 2 on the TLOs currently?
3, I think it's 3.
I keep hearing 3 and then somebody said 2. All right, okay. So some number that appears to be 3 of Berkeley police officers are essentially double, what's the word? Double sworn to also work for NICRIC as terrorism liaison officers. The idea is that they're trained in the details of terrorism and can advise the rest of the police department on how to fight terrorism in Berkeley. What the Berkeley Police Department says that these 3 people do is they file suspicious activity reports. But look at the numbers. You only filed 1. How can you possibly have 3 cops assigned to file 1 report about a domestic dispute? The answer is they are doing something else. And what they are doing, we don't know. And the problem with having people joint sworn, with having terrorism liaison officers on your police department, is that according to the rules as written down by the FBI, essentially that these Berkeley police officers can and must follow if they get direct orders from the FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and they sign a non-disclosure agreement. So if it's happening, they can't tell anybody. And this is why San Francisco pulled out of the JTTF. Berkeley is not per se in it, but we are potentially in a position where some number of officers on our force can be taking direct orders from that source. And I don't want to sound paranoid. I don't know if they are or they aren't. But if they were, we wouldn't know. And that's a problem for what we call transparency in policing, and that's a problem for accountability to the community. And for Urban Shield, well, it's a really big weapons expo and SWAT contest, and we really should get out of it. Urban Shield is an example of differing perceptions of policing. If you live in one class or kind of skin, I think it's the most terrifying thing that you've ever seen, and I'm in that category because I went to it this year and I was scared. If you live in another place, it's like a spectator sport. It's really, really cool. You know, part of our problem in this policing conversation is people don't experience the police the same way, which is why we sometimes have to talk about accountability, because we can't always make people get into our own heads and see what we see when we look at them. But as Andrea pointed out, we can talk about management, we can talk about plans, we can talk about accountability, and we can talk about transparency. In other words, tell us what you are doing and let us have some control over how you do it.
Just 2 other things on Urban Shield that I want to say. One is that the extreme vendor orientation of Urban Shield is of great concern to me. The vendors have a very large role in determining how the programming works, what the exercises are going to look like, etc. So that has been an ongoing challenge. Those same vendors support our sheriff financially in elections, and I'm worried about that connection. We are handing over our police training, some of our police training, to vendors. That is not something I am happy about. I think we need to move away from that. I would say that regardless of what the function of government was, that is not who I want deciding what training our employees receive. And also the terrorism nexus that was utilized in Urban Shield is extremely disturbing in that it first of all requires there be a nexus with terrorism, and the kind of terrorism posited at Urban Shield this year was actually ridiculous. One of the exercises was that Hezbollah had come over from the Middle East to South America, traveled to the Bay Area, and had captured a dam. And we were going to use these pontoon boats to go out, pontoon boats provided by vendors, to go out and recapture this dam. There's no discussion of the kind of terrorism we really see. The domestic terrorism of a white person driving over people on a sidewalk. That's the terrorism that we have in America. We obviously had horrible experiences with international terrorism, but the reality, the daily reality of what we need to be prepared for is not that. It is this other level. The daily reality of what we need to be prepared for is earthquakes and fires. One thing about Urban Shield that concerns me so much is all of the discussion is on responding to the immediate event as it happens right then. Not preparation for fire or earthquake or terrorism, and not so much recovery at the end. There's no discussion in Urban Shield about recovering. It's all about this flash thing happened and we responded. There's so much more. And I should say about one other example very quickly, was an actual live example that we had at Children's Hospital in Oakland where our police and the Oakland police talked down the offenders and everyone survived. And in the Urban Shield exercise, those people died. So that exercise is training people in the opposite direction from what our police already know how to do. So I really question the value of the kinds of exercises, etc. And then the last thing I'd like to say, and this is true, there's some people in the audience that are very involved in the CERT training and the other training there. I support that training, but I think that training can go on outside the Urban Shield framework. We do not need to have CERT training after Urban Shield. I know people have been very patient. It's been a long evening. I wanted to give each of the panelists a chance to say a little bit more about moving forward and what we can be doing next. So, George.
Okay. In order to move forward with this charter amendment to have a real police commission in Berkeley, it's going to be a strong, sustained campaign over the next 12 months. And we have to bring together a strong coalition of diverse interests, diverse communities, bring many perspectives together. In this room, there are probably 10 different things that people are concerned about, and we don't all have to agree with each other. But we have to agree that we have to have a structure in place that's going to move the needle as far as possible in pursuit of the common goal of police accountability. And there's a role for everybody in this campaign. We've got to raise money. We've got to hold house parties. We've got to find ways to talk to diverse communities, go door to door, speak to churches and neighborhood groups, all of it. And people who've done this know this is a very intensive and protracted campaign that we'll need real commitment to. If we stay clear about our goals and focus on building a strong base in the community and stay positive and respectful of each other, we'll succeed in making a historic change in Berkeley. But maybe more important, we'll learn valuable lessons on the power of the people to create the kind of government that they want to have.
Thank you, George. Moving forward. Thoughts? Moving forward. Yeah.
Well, sure, but I already said December 5th. So I'll say it one more time. Come to the council on December 5th and support the surveillance and community safety ordinance. But above and beyond that, I think the challenge with police reform, and you've seen it tonight, is that it's so wildly piecemeal. You try to pick up this little piece and then that little piece, and there's a million little pieces, and you can see when Kate made a list of all the pieces, it was about like 10 things. She probably left out 3 or 4 that you could have stuck on there. So I guess what I would say is that, you know, the thing that links all of these things together is the idea of getting some community control back and getting some idea of policing is something that happens to us by our consent rather than by fiat. And I think that we really, you know, you have to start challenging what safety actually is, because it's used sort of like a curse word almost. Well, it's public safety, so shut up. You know, it's public safety, so F you, is essentially what's being sort of presented back to us. But you are the public, and it's your safety that they're talking about. So I think we have to kind of, you know, kind of start owning that and saying, you're not talking about public safety, you're talking about public danger, because I'm a victim of what you're putting out, because what you're putting out threatens my safety in these really concrete and visceral ways that I can describe. I mean, I don't like going up to the city council and crying at the podium, and I don't do it often, but you know, I'm an activist. Surveillance stuff threatens me in really visceral ways, and sometimes you have to look people between the eyes and kind of tell them that. And the more people do it, the more it's not just the same few people. And I mean, I love the Berkeley City Council, and I go all the time, but like, sometimes it feels like it's a place where everybody knows my name because it's always the same people. So, to the extent that it becomes a larger project to sort of humanize this and to, you know, to get a broader constituency of people to speak, I think the better off that will be. Because as I said, public safety is essentially being thrown at us like a really heavy stone to kind of kill the conversation. And unless we can sort of take that term and unpack it and change what it means, this is going to be a long haul. And they are way ahead of us. They're way ahead of us in surveillance. They're way ahead of us in the privileges that are given to police. That whole preponderance of lying and clear and convincing evidence conversation is insane. There's a standard of lying in the court for people. Police aren't people. They get a different standard. What the heck is that? You know, we wind up fighting these rear guard battles that are completely insane and make no sense. So I guess I would just encourage us to start unpacking that the definition of public safety as it's provided and the policy that comes out of that is a really screwed up definition. And we sort of need to take that word back and own it and change it.
Yeah. Thank you very much to both of you. I really appreciate your participation. I was going to say something along the lines of what Tracy said, but I can't say it any better than what she and George had to say. So I want to thank all of you very much for coming. I hope you've signed on to our newsletter. You can ignore all the pieces about potholes, et cetera, There's often news in there about police reform, and I'd love to have a way to communicate with you about what we've been working on. And I just want to tell you one more little story. Last year at the Wellstar Democratic Renewal Club, we had people come from Oakland and people come from Berkeley to talk about police reform. And basically, Oakland talked about its hopes and its dreams and what they were doing with ballot measures and how they wanted to see changes in the police. And the people from Berkeley got up and said, we're great, we were great in 1970 and we're still great and we don't need to do anything. And I was so concerned about that. So I want to say that the biggest challenge that we have in our city is denial that we have a problem. That is what we really need to combat. And we need to combat it in people's real life experiences. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you.